Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started and honor our time commitment here. So just a few housekeeping items before we jump into introductions. So you'll notice that your video and mic has been turned off. That's in order to keep you anonymous. We are recording this presentation. We will have 15 minutes at the end of the session for Q&A. So please feel free to put your questions into the Q&A feature either at the top or bottom of your screen. And do this as we're moving through the presentation, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible at the end. At the end of the session, you'll be redirected to a post-webinar survey. This survey is completely voluntary, but we do really rely on your responses for grant and research purposes. It's why we're able to bring you this presentation for free this evening. So please do take a few minutes to fill that out if you're able to. And all of those survey answers will be kept confidential. So for those of you joining us for the first time this evening, my name is Amanda Lamb, and I'm the Director of CFI at the Pine River Institute. Pine River is an in-person treatment center located north of Toronto, just outside of Shelburne, that serves youth who struggle with mental health and often concurrent addictive behaviors. Parents and guardians learn and grow alongside their youth while participating in a parallel parent program where they learn about adolescent development, why the teen brain works the way it does, and how to support their children. To learn more about Pine River, you can please visit our website at pineriverinstitute.com. Now, I'd love to introduce our speaker for this evening, Dr. Todd Cunningham. Dr. Cunningham is a clinical and school psychologist, assistant professor in the teaching stream at the University of Toronto, and provides psychological services through his private practice. He completed his postdoctoral fellowship in the psychology department at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto and obtained his PhD in clinical psychology at the University of Toronto. A sought-after public speaker and consultant, Dr. Cunningham has shared his expertise with parents, students, educators, school boards, and other professionals across Canada. In addition to hundreds of workshops, Dr. Cunningham has guest lectured at universities, given keynote addresses, presented at educational and research conferences, and appeared on CBC several times. We are very fortunate to have him with us this evening. Please welcome Dr. Todd Cunningham. Oh, and you're on mute. Sorry, Doctor. It's only been 3 years of a pandemic.
It's only been 3, yes. So first,
thank
you, Amanda, for that nice introduction. And thank you to everyone for allowing me to beam into your space wherever you are this evening. Tonight, I really want to talk about mental health and how mental health really goes and has a huge impact on the way that individuals go about learning. And the first part of this is really going to be more of trying to understand the problems we're running into, so that then when we think about the interventions, think about the things we can do to help, we have a really good understanding of why we do what we do when it comes to those recommendations. Now, any good presentation needs a good story to start off with. And this story is brought to you by my daughter, Rachel, when she was 2.5 years old. Now, she wants everybody to know she is now 10 years old and she no longer looks like this. But when she was 2.5, this picture was taken of her outside of her great granny's house in BC, in Victoria, BC. As she's going down a rope swing that was in the playground behind Great Granny's house. Now, to get to this picture, there's a kind of a story that led up to her, or the day that led up to this. We woke up that morning back here in Toronto, where we live, and they had the usual hustle and bustle getting ready to catch a flight. Lots of excitement taking the subway and the bus up to the airport. And this was Rachel's first time flying on an airplane, so very, very exciting. Plane kind of took off at about 2 o'clock Toronto time and loved it. She couldn't wait because she knew that while you're on a plane, you get to watch as much TV as you want. It was somewhere near the end of the second time going through Frozen, which was probably our 900th time watching Frozen, that she started to get restless. 2.5-year-old started to move around, kind of, pushing. And so I got up and I walked up and down the aisles of the airplane with her. But still couldn't keep doing that. Needed to kind of sit down and just pass the time. So as she sat down beside me, I said, listen, Rachel, I promise if you watch some more TV, you can go on that swing that your older sister has been talking about for the last like 6 months. That's rope swing behind Great Granny's house when we get there. And you could see Rachel's eyes light up. It's like, oh my goodness, that's awesome. And so at that moment, she kind of pulled herself together and concentrated on watching more TV. So she was great. We landed, we got out, we took a cab in to see Great Granny. We got there. This was like kind of about 5 o'clock their time, 8 o'clock Toronto time, Rachel's bedtime. We had some dinner, some snacks, and as we're eating, Rachel comes up and, yanks on my shirt saying, hey, you promised. I'm like, I sure did. So we went outside and she ran up, jumped onto the swing, all the endorphins and the just a chemical explosion went off, the adrenaline, and she's loving it. And I take this picture. Now, if I just let her and her sister do a couple of times and say, okay, girls, it's actually quite late, we have to go in, life would have been good. And that would have made me a smart man. However, I let them play a little bit longer, and then suddenly 2 boys came onto the scene. And they walked up to the mound where the rope swing went from. Now, Rachel had just gotten to the end of the rope line, and she was pulling the rope back up to the mound for the next person to take their turn. And I could see in her brain as she's kind of working at this, I'm a good girl. I'm a good girl. I'm supposed to share. But as she got up to the swing or the mound, she started to turn to jump onto the rope. And I was like, Rachel! And she turned with this angry face, threw the rope at the next boy, who came over here and gave me the weakest of hits on my leg. And I was like, oh, now I have to consequence you. So I grabbed her, and she now burst out into tears and screaming and having a complete temper tantrum as I walk off the playground with her. And I just kept thinking to myself, and then started talking to her very quietly. I'm really sorry, Rachel. I'm sorry this happened. I'm sorry this happened. And we kind of went off. Now, I say this because I want you just quickly to think about this story. I want you to think about the story in terms of what was the peak behavior that took place? When was Rachel's peak behavior? And from that, I want you to work back and think about what was the trigger? What got the behaviors really going? What were the agitation, the accelerations, and then the de-escalation and then recovery? So just give you 30 seconds to think about this to yourself. Okay, I like 15 seconds. So for me, the peak behavior is clearly when she's having her temper tantrum. It's when she hits me and I pick her, Rachel, up, and she's having the temper tantrum. That is her peak. She is completely out of control at that point. And she's luckily still 2.5, and she's a size where I can grab her, carry her away from the situation that was in. However, the trigger is a little bit more challenging. For me, what really started kind of the domino effect that happens in this situation, for me, really comes to when I made the promise to her in the airplane that she could, if she continued to watch TV, she could then go and use go on the swing. And the reason that is the trigger, because at that point in time, I basically called on Rachel to use what we call hot EF, hot executive functioning, her emotional ability to control herself and really regulate herself. See, when we think about self-regulation, we also need to think about self-control. Self-regulation is our body's natural mechanism to keep ourselves regulated, keep ourselves in a harmonious point. We do this pretty automatically. However, when it goes awry, when it's not working very well, then we can become dysregulated. And then we have a lot of the emotions coming out. Rachel having her temper tantrum, she was very dysregulated. However, on the other side is what we call self-control. And self-control is our ability to kind of repress or control self-regulation. As Rachel was walking up and pulling the swing up, I could see kind of the self-control gears going on. I'm a good girl. I'm a good girl. I'm a good girl. I need to share. However, at that point, she was so dysregulated, she couldn't actually follow through with her self-control. The dysregulation took over. Now, going back to the airplane, when I'm on the airplane, she's getting a little dysregulated. She's getting a kind of agitated. But then I say, hey, there's a big reward out there. And if you do this, if you do what I'm asking for, if you regulate yourself and keep yourself behaving the way that I want you to do, if you use that great self-control of yours, then you are going to get this reward. And she does. But that starts to burn up a lot of energy. It burns up a lot of energy using that self-control to keep that regulation under control, especially for a young person who is already feeling pretty dysregulated by the whole environment of being on an airplane. So when we think about kind of these behaviors that we see, we really have to keep self-control and self-regulation in mind. And we know that these two things are really important because we actually can see these from a neurological perspective, kind of the way the brain works. Self-regulation is what we call the low road in the brain of how the brain reacts to a situation. And self-control is kind of a high road, our ability to use our kind of frontal lobe to be able to think about situations. And really, these two regions come down to two key parts of our brain. The first one is the amygdala, which is an appraisal system for basic sensory inputs and basic reactions of how our bodies are doing. It doesn't think about the context that much. It just thinks about, hey, something is wrong or something's really good here. I need to get this body to do something that I need to do. So 250 million years ago, when the amygdala was developed, if we were walking through a field and a big fuzzy thing jumped out and ate my friend, well, the amygdala is going to process all that sensory information. Big fuzzy things jumping out, eat friends, very scary. And because the amygdala is connected right to the hippocampus, our memory system in our brain, it quickly lays down the memory. Big fuzzy things, bad. Don't do, like, bad. So next time we're coming along and we see a big fuzzy thing, the amygdala goes, boom, big bad things, and gets the body to move into a fight or flight response so that we get out of there. Also, if we're feeling very overwhelmed by the situation, like when we're exhausted or we have too much stress on our hand, the amygdala also says, hey, this is a bad situation you're in. This is a bad situation. We need to get ourselves out of here. This is not going well. Rachel, sitting on the airplane for a prolonged period of time, was burning up so much energy in her body that the amygdala starts saying, hey, this is not a good situation that we're in here. We need to get ourselves out of here. Start to do some behaviors to help get us out of here. And so she starts to rock and pester. And so that calls me in as a parent to be able to help out. So her amygdala actually does know how to manipulate me and gets me to do what it wants it to do. However, and this is all very fast, very automatic, and really outside of our immediate control. Now, where our control does come in is in the in self-control, the high road, because here we have the anterior angular cortex right up here, anterior singular, sorry, cortex up here, and it's an appraisal system, and it appraises the context, what's going on in the environment around us. It's the part that tells Rachel she's a good girl and that she needs to behave and she needs to follow the rules of what's going on. However, if the amygdala becomes too big, if the amygdala reacts and kind of fires itself up, it starts to take over. And when the amygdala does is when it starts to take over, it literally shuts down the frontal lobe so that you can't think anymore. And so the ability to have self-control completely gets turned off. On the other hand, if you have the energy and the resources and you practice self-control, then self-control can activate first and it can actually go through and turn off the amygdala and turn it down. And that's why we always are needing to think about kind of the difference between self-control and self-regulation as two fundamental things. Self-regulation is our body's natural thermostat of where we're at in terms of where we're at, and self-control is our ability to connect and be able to help with regulation, but can only do that to a certain degree. We completely become dysregulated, then we lose it. And dysregulation really has to do, or self-regulation in general, really has to do with stress. And stress is just how much energy we're using at any given time. It's just the measurement of energy that our bodies are using. Zero stress is actually bad. You have to have some stress. If you have absolutely no stress, you're dead, technically. So you need some stress. And actually, we need a certain optimal level of stress. All of us kind of find we get into that zone when we have a certain level of stress that we're working with to be able to get us to do stuff, get us going. For some students that we see, they don't have actually enough stress in their life. They're pretty disengaged. They're pretty relaxed. It's very hard to get them going. We actually have to increase their stress levels to be able to build up those energies to get them engaged and get them out the door. For other, though, those stress levels start to go too high. And as those stress levels go too high, then the brain, again, the amygdala starts to take over and starts to go through 3 phases of how it's going to reorganize the brain. And these 3 phases can really be mapped out onto, kind of really be mapped out around the stress, how much stress the individual's under. So as the stress starts to hit a kind of a critical level, the brain goes into the first phase, which is actually a social engagement phase. It's actually going to try and protect itself. It wants to find people around us to kind of bring them in to help with its regulation. Rachel in the chair beside me doesn't go and have a temper tantrum right away. She does stuff. She's wiggling, she's figgling around, and she's basically pulling me in to help her deal with a situation she can't deal with right now. She's feeling pretty dysregulated, and she's grabbing me as a social engagement to kind of pull in. We also know we can see social engagement in younger kids too. We can see them like babies. You're walking down the street with a baby and a stranger comes up and the baby sees the stranger and starts to look like terrified, but then looks through the parent, and if the parent looks okay, the baby relaxes. So again, social engagement is the first thing that we do as humans whenever we start to run into situations that we're feeling too stressful, that feel overwhelmed by. And for us who have partners, we often find that we talk to our partners, and that's a really nice thing. It's also what the literature shows is one of the best protectors of mental health is having a really good friend, one good friend. Because if I can share my feelings and my days with my friend, and they can share with me if it's bi-directional, then that is a huge protector against the other risk factors around mental health. Having a bi-directional relationship with an individual, having a reciprocal relationship with a friend is a really, really good protective factor because we can share our stressors and talk them through. So social engagement is the first thing. However, if we can't get to our safe place, our safe person, or we don't have a safe person around, or if the stress level goes up too fast, then the amygdala takes over and we go into the fight or flight. So social control shuts down and the amygdala goes on. And when the amygdala goes on, as we move into fight or flight, it literally shuts off parts of the body that are not useful. It does not need critical thinking. It doesn't need the frontal lobe to be engaged in thinking because it's either going to run away from what it is or fight it. So it turns off critical thinking. That's why when a kid's in a temper tantrum or a kid who's very dysregulated, you can't have a conversation with them. They're not taking anything in because literally the thinking part of their brain is turned off during that time. You have to wait till they calm down again before you can re-engage that individual to kind of talk through the behaviors that have been going on. I couldn't talk to Rachel as she's having her temper tantrum. I had to wait for to de-escalate her. And as she's recovering, then I could be able to have my conversation about what behaviors were appropriate and not appropriate. The next thing that the brain does, it shuts off the frontal lobe. The amygdala turns off the stomach because we don't need to process food. That's why we often feel that we get the butterflies in our stomachs. It dumps adrenaline into our system, so we feel our heart starting to race. We can get the cold sweat that start to happen, and tears and kids urinating are often due to the high cortisol levels that are developed during this time. Now, the problem is if someone stays in that fight or flight mode for too long, they start to exhaust themselves. They start to exhaust themselves, and then they basically shut down. They go to a freeze. They just shut themselves down. I can't deal with this anymore. I'm totally burned out. And so they shut down. And this is where we see a whole sense of kind of like depressive behaviors coming out, is these individuals who have been in the fight or flight for way too long, and they just burn themselves out and they go into this freeze side. Unfortunately, a lot of the students that I work with move between fight or flight and freeze, fight or flight and freeze, fight or flight and freeze. They don't get down to this kind of green recovery zone. They're always in this very high level of arousal constantly in their lives. And that's very taxing on the body because that just really pulls away. Now, we know that this stress and this anxiety, this anxiousness has a direct impact on learning as well. So we can see this through some really good studies that have been done that literally have mapped out how do people go about learning. So one review of this found that if a person has too much stress before during the kind of in class and all that, their learning decreases. However, if they have a little stress just before they start learning, that actually allows them to learn better. If they have a little bit of stress just before they go to bed, before a test, that actually helps them remember the information better. Actually, a good strategy is for a student to spend the last 30 minutes before they fall asleep just reviewing their notes before the test the next day, because it helps their brain think about and play with that information all night long. However, just before you write the test, if you have lots of stress, or you are, as you're writing the test, you're getting stressed, then you decrease in your ability to recall the information. Those times it's hard because again, your brain is shutting off. You don't have your brain's ability to engage in the information. And we can actually see this quantifiably happen. We can actually see that if you have everybody learn one list of words, and then you have a major stressful event, and then they have to recall another set of recall the information, that those peoples who have to recall decrease in the amount of information that they can recall because of the stressful event impacts their ability to use their executive functioning abilities, their frontal lobe, to be able to pull up that information. And that's why we see a lot of test anxiety coming. A lot of students who have they study for the test, but then when they go in to write the test, they go into a fight or flight mode, they panic, and so suddenly their frontal lobe turns off, and now they're staring at a blank page and don't have a clue what to do. And all that studying that they did now doesn't seem to pay off. And as they're sitting there looking at the page saying, I don't know what the question is, oh my goodness, their stress levels keep going up. And as their stress levels go up, their frontal lobe closes up even more. And then they just go into total meltdown and don't get anything out. So we always have to be thinking about how do we use self-control to regulate ourselves, get ourselves calm better, so that when we go into situations such as times of writing tests, we're able to engage our system. Another situation that we often find is over if there's a huge amount of stress during the learning process, that again, it can impact how much we can retain. So in this study, what happened was you had individuals had learned a whole list of words. Then there was a major stressful event for one individual. And the way that we in psychology do major stressful events is we put your hand in cold water until you can't do it anymore. And that causes lots of stress in the body. So they have a major stressful event, then immediately they have to learn another set of information, and then they do a recall. And at the end of the recall, they find out that the person who had no stress is able to integrate both parts of it learning, but the group that had the stressful event just before the learning took place, they can't recall that information. So again, if students are going into class and they're feeling very stressed out, if they're feeling very anxious about this environment and are worried about what's going on, then they're just not going to be learning. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of students who are basically sitting in class feeling completely overwhelmed with the assignments they have, overwhelmed with the learning that's going on because they just can't concentrate on what is being said. They can't concentrate on the materials that the teachers are going through. They can't concentrate on the materials that they have to read. They just can't concentrate, and they can't absorb that information. And that concentration really gets at a key skill that we often talk about in learning, which is our ability to attend. It's our ability to focus and attend to the information in front of us. And when it comes to attention, we're thinking about what we call sustained attention, that ability to turn on and pull in information and to think about that information and to recall information. Sustained attention is a really important thing that facilitates learning to take place. And attention is governed by three attentional networks. The first one is alertness, turning on attention. The second one is orienting, pay attention to this, don't pay attention to those other things. And the last one is the executive functioning that goes on, the planning, the organization, the prioritizing, the monitoring, and the shifting. It's that really governs the other three. With the attentional system, this system they're all built on top of each other. So if alertness is not working, then orienting and executive functioning is not working. If orienting is not working, then executive functioning is not working. So let's just quickly look at these three in particularly. So the first one is the alertness system. Well, and as I said, the alertness system is all about turning on the attentional resources, just getting attention to happen. We know for kids who are exhausted, they don't have attention because they're really tired. They can't pull, they just can't get it going. And unfortunately, so many of our youth these days are staying up way too late so that when they're coming to school the next day, they don't have the attentional resource to do it. Or they've worked very hard throughout the whole day and they kind of burnt up all their energy because school was so demanding that they come home and they don't have any attentional resources anymore because they're completely exhausted. Or if they don't have a good diet, or they are lacking, if they're dehydrated, all these things can impact attention, the alertness system, as well as having a neurodevelopmental disorder such as ADHD. ADHD, the primary challenge of ADHD is actually impacting the alertness system. The brain doesn't have enough dopamine, which is required for sustained attention to be able to be turned on. And so because the brain doesn't have enough of that dopamine, then they can't pull on their attentional resources when they need them. So as a teacher, as the ADHD student sits in the classroom and the teachers are talking, the student basically starts to daydream and looks at other ways. Other students who have ADHD, they don't do the daydream. They try and generate the dopamine, and they actually get up and start moving around and talking to kids, and they're trying to get their bodies going and develop that, get that dopamine going, turn on that attentional resources. The other problem with the ADHD, it's not a problem, it's more just a part of the syndrome, is that it is really the disorder of stimulation. So if I'm in a low stimulating environment, I don't have the chemicals to be able to get my brain going. But if I'm in a highly stimulating environment, if I'm doing something I really like to do, well, boom, I got the dopamine levels and my brain turns on. And then I have the attentional resources and I can do that. And that's why often with kids with ADHD, we see that in activities that they enjoy, they can do those forever. But come to listening to their teachers or coming to do their homework, not exciting enough to get the brain going. So alertness is the first thing that we have to think about in this system. The next one is orienting. Orienting is my ability to be able to say, I need to pay attention to this, and I don't want to pay attention to something else. Students who have difficulties with orienting, often they get lost in their thoughts. So if I have mental health related issues, if I have that anxiety going on, then I'm going to have a hard time with my orienting, because as I go in to write the test and I'm worried about that test, I have a worried thought that's running in my mind. I'm going to fail this test. I'm going to fail the test. I didn't study enough. I didn't study enough. Oh my goodness, Mark studied so much more than I did. I can't believe he's going to pass the test. I'm not going to pass the test. You get this worried thought going on. It's going, and it again pulls away from that attentional resource to be able to concentrate on what you need to be doing. So orienting is the next one that comes in. Kids who've had a lot of trauma also have difficulties with orienting because they become hyper vigilant of the environment around them. As they go into an environment, they're constantly seeking out where the areas of threat might be. So they can't pay attention to the teachers or the classwork in front of them. Same with homework. If I'm having a really hard time, let's say I've struggled with writing for my whole life. I have really poor graph or motor skills. So the ability to form letters and numbers accurately. We know that if a grade 4 student can't produce 30 letters within 1 minute neatly and accurately, then they have a fundamental basic writing challenge, and that causes a lot of stress in their body. And so when they're in grade 7 or 8 and they go to write, they're going to have kind of an aversion reaction to the writing, and so they have a hard time with orienting. They look at the work and they get overwhelmed, they get panicky about it. The amygdala fires up saying, this is a very bad thing to do, and they can't orient on that task, and so they lose where they are. And then the last one is the area of executive functioning. And executive functioning is all about the planning and organization. It's the ability to plan, organize, prioritize, shift from one thing to another thing, memorize information, and also check. This is the part of the brain up here that has to be turned on to be able to engage in all those processes that are required to be able to do school very well. And again, what happens is for some students who have like a neurodevelopmental disorder, like ASD, executive functioning is directly impacted by that. Whereas a lot of other students, like the ADHD students or the sleep deprived child or the very anxious child, they will also have executive functioning challenges, but it's due to the fact that some other part of the attentional system that is knocked out. Now, one of the big ones around executive functioning that we often see as being very challenging for students is switching. And switching is when we transition from one activity to another activity. When we're having to switch, moving from one activity to another activity, what we're really asking the brain to do is go, oh, you're doing this thing right now. Well, kind of shut that down. You have to kind of shut that down and kind of activate a new part of your brain to be able to do that next activity. So as I go from having to be outside, I kind of got my brain going for recess. I'm playing outside. And then I hear the bell and I have to kind of shut down my expectations and my play for outside and move over to my expectations to do math next. Now, kids who have executive functioning challenges, that shifting is very, very hard. Their brains go under high levels of stress. They get very, very stressed out when they go through a shift, a transition period. And that often is where we see a lot of the misbehaviors coming out, because their brains basically go into a fight or flight mode because they're having a quick shift take place. The brain goes, I can't deal with this. I don't know what's going to happen. It freaks out, goes into fight or flight, and therefore it can't attend, it can't engage in the next activity because now it's in a fight or flight mode and has not fully recovered to be able to, again, engage in the learning process. Those stress levels are just too high and it can't engage. Another big one here is we find time. So many of these students who have executive function challenges have no sense of time. You say, hey, Todd, we're leaving in 10 minutes. And then you come up and I'm still just hanging out going, oh, I think we have, like, Todd, what are you doing? I'm like, just finish up doing this activity. And like, I told you, we have to get ready. 10 minutes ago. They just have no sense of time. They'll go up to do homework and they'll come back like an hour later and they'll have like 3 words written on a page. They're like, what did you do for the last hour? They're like, I wasn't working for a whole hour. I was just up there for like 10 minutes. And no, you were up there for a long time. What were you doing? So executive time is another big one that we see that as a weakness that comes out when you have executive functioning. So switching, and time are very, very big ones. So when it comes to this world of stress, what we know that is that it has a huge impact. As the stress levels go up, our brains go into a fight or flight. If they go too high, our brains just completely shut down. And this has also an impact on our attention system, our ability to turn on our attention system, the alertness system, our ability to focus our attention through the orienting system, and then the overall executive functioning that's going on. Now, often when a person's getting up into that fight or flight, as that stress levels goes up and starts impacting all these systems, we can't do anything at that moment. They're in fight or flight, we have to get to recovery. So it's really important for us as educators, as parents, to, when we see an event that takes a kid into fight or flight, is to do the ABCs, to think about what actually happened before that behavior, because that behavior is the consequence of a whole bunch of things that just happened. So for Rachel, the hitting me, that behavior of hitting me and being defiant and aggressive towards me, that only came because I had a whole bunch of antecedents happening before. She was exhausted. She had just flown. I had used hot EF on her to be able to get her to control herself. She was depleted. So I have to think about that. But we also have to think about the consequences we do, because consequences reinforce the brain into knowing how to do something. So again, the amygdala, the part of the brain that is responsible for appraising our, using our stress levels to understand if we're in danger or not, it's connected right to memory. So if I'm feeling very stressed out and suddenly I get an immediate reprise, then the brain's going to say, oh, what happened there? That's something really good. So for example, if I'm a child who's in a classroom and I am totally stressed out, the work's really hard, I can't, I have ADHD, so I can't focus on the work, and my teacher keeps redirecting me to the work that I'm doing. I'm trying to do this, I don't know what to do. My stress levels are going higher and higher, higher. I'm at a point where I'm feeling overwhelmed by it. I'm starting to go into a fight or flight. I snap at my teacher saying, no, I'm not going to do it. My teacher then goes, get out in the hallway, Todd. As I walk out to the hallway, what happens? My stress levels just decrease significantly, really fast. I'm out of that stressful environment. And so the amygdala learns very quickly, oh, that's a good behavior. We should do that more often, because that got us what we were looking for. That got us out of that stressful environment. So if our consequences that we're using are removing an individual from the actual stressors that are going on, then the brain's going to learn, do that behavior more, do that behavior more, do that behavior more. That's why it's really important for us to actually use a lot of praise. 9 praises for every 1 redirect. We actually want to praise the brain a lot for all the behaviors that it's doing well. We want to help to keep these antecedents going very nicely. We want to keep praise, 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 praise to the brain, so the brain's feeling really good. It reduces its stress levels because it feels like it's doing a good job, and the teachers are happy with it. And so its stress levels stay down. And by praising, as well as by praising, we're actually telling the brain what we want it to do and what we're expecting of it, versus always redirecting. And we can also use what's called the redirect praise. So if I need to get Johnny to line up I'm at the door, I might say, as Johnny's kind of walking, going, hey, Johnny, I'm so glad that you're deciding to line up at the door right now. Thank you, bud, for doing that. Even though he might not have been intending to do that, by using a praise, by praising what he might have decided to do, Johnny goes, oh, I should line up the door now. And hey, my teacher's happy about me. I'm going to do that. Versus, hey, Johnny, please line up at the door. That tone and that kind of redirection, for Johnny, he probably experienced that more as criticism for the fact that you're getting mad at him. And that would increase his stress levels and more likely to lead to some defiance. So these systems are really important that we need to be always keeping in mind. So what do we do? I think that's the big question that often comes out. What do we do when we're having to think about these areas? Well, the first thing we need to do is reduce the stressors not that slide. We need to reduce the stressors in our lives, or in a student's lives. We need to kind of decrease the stressors. Now, there's some things that are directly in our control, and there's some things that are not. As educators, we don't have control of the home situation, the amount of sleep and nutrition and home environment. We can't control. We also can't usually control what we call big and small T traumas. Big T traumas is being like a car accident or witnessing a violent act towards myself or someone else. Whereas small T trauma is kind of like the bullying that's taking place on a daily basis in the classroom, or it is the fact that I have a graphomotor weakness and no one's accommodating me. And each day I come to school, I feel completely overwhelmed by the tasks that are being given to me. Those are small T traumas. Those are parts of the brain that are kind of continuously feeling trauma that's going on. So those are kind of big things. Things that we can so that's that. As parents, things that we can influence sugar. Screen time is a really important one that we need to be thinking about. What we know with screen time is that is a huge stressor on the brain. So as we see when we see fast movement happening on a screen, that is actually increasing our stress level. So um, any entertainment screen, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, video games, all of those have fast movement going on, and that actually increases the stress very high in the brain. It also generates tons of dopamine. So kids who have ADHD are more likely to get addicted to screens, the entertainment screens. And you really can see this in young kids because when you pull the kid off of a screen, you actually see them dysregulate. And often what we find is with younger kids, it takes about 30 to 45 minutes before they re-regulate again after being on a screen. Their brains are totally dysregulated because they just got up on a huge high. That's why I hate when teachers put on TV during lunchtime. I remember for Rachel when she was in kindergarten, the teacher put on TV sometimes, and she would come home on those days and she would not have eaten any for lunch because as the TV is on, she's just like and forgets to eat. So it's a very challenging thing. Screen time really has to be monitored. It is a big thing. But there's other things we can control. The environment, how loud an environment is. For some kids, we need to put what we call loop earbuds in. They're kind of like little earbuds that they go in that they're not electronic or anything. They just kind of dim, lower the decibels that are going into the ears so that it doesn't sound as loud. We can reduce the lighting or how much kind of visual sensory information is going on. Some students actually work better when they go to the back of the classroom to be able to just kind of pay attention, look into the corner, because it cuts out so much of that stimulation going on, which actually increases that stress levels. We can think about predictability. This is huge for a lot of students who have high stress levels or have any part of the attentional network not working well, the alertness, orienting, or executive functioning. By knowing what the routine of the day is and being able to kind of cross off when things are happening and to have warnings around those transition times, it helps their brains to feel calm because they know what's coming up next. If they don't know what's coming up next, then that creates more stress. Several years ago, I had a client who was he was grade 10, gifted ADHD guy. Came into the clinic, sat down, and I asked my opening question, do you know why you're here? He's like, yeah, I know why I'm here. Your punishment. I'm like, oh, okay. What am I punishment for? And he goes, because I don't listen and I don't pay attention to anyone. And so he starts talking about his day. He goes, you know, life is very exciting. Life's very exciting. He goes, I don't have a clue what's happening. The only strategy I have in high school is I take the same classes as this other guy. And I follow him from class to class to class because I don't know what's coming up next. I don't know where I'm supposed to be. I just follow him. And sometimes I walk into class and the teacher's like, okay, class, time to write the test. He's like, oops, should have studied for that last night. Or, hey, class, hand me the essay. And he would say, I gotta go to the washroom, and run down to the washroom and write the essay and pull off a B. He was a really smart guy. He could do that. But the main thing is he had no sense of what's going on. So creating routines with schedules and warning around transitions can really reduce the stress on individuals. The level of challenge is a really important thing. Ontario now has the universal screening coming in for literacy, which is really important, so we can actually gauge where is the reading development of young individuals. Actually, most of the reading tools can go up to grade 8 or grade 9. So we could actually be screening all the way through to say, hey, do you have sufficient reading skills to be able to do the work that I'm presenting you? Is the work that I'm giving you going to be too high of a level of challenge and you just can't be able to do it? Because if it is, it's going to create too much stress. Or on the other hand, we can think of relationships. Relationships, another big one. As I said, if you're having stress around your relationships, that can have a huge impact. But relationships can also help reduce stress. If I have a good relationship with my teacher, if I see my teacher as a safe person I can go to, then I can use that social engagement part of the brain to actually pull them in and help them regulate, to help them feel calm. If I have a good friend in my classroom, that's going to actually help me to regulate and help me feel calmer because I have that person there. So there's some key things we can do to be able to help out with that kind of thinking about and helping to reduce the stress levels. The other part we have to think about is then around the alertness systems. And the first one is increasing alertness. Sometimes we just need to get the system to be more turned on. We have to get that brain fired up. And to be able to do that, there's kind of some key things that we can do. Good sleep is really important for alertness. Good food is really good. For older kids, finding the best time of the day to actually do their homework is really important. Some kids are better right after school. Some kids are a little bit better later at night. Physical activity, this is a huge one. The research shows that if you basically go for a 10-15 minute run, or if you basically get your heart up for 10 to 15 minutes, you basically create kind of a 45-minute window of more alertness right after you're done that, especially for our ADHD population. It's really, really important. And the final one is simultaneous stimulation. It's when you're stimulating one part of your brain and not, so another part of your brain can be able to do the work. So, for example, listening to music without lyrics is going to stimulate kind of the right side of your brain, help generate dopamine, get the system woken up, but not interfering with the language that's being processed as you're kind of reading or thinking about what your work is. A stress ball is a great tactile stimulation. Standing at your desk and being able to rock back and forth, great stimulation. Chewing gum actually is a very good stimulator. The chewing actually creates dopamine in the brain and kind of helps it. But if you're watching TV, well, that's a bad stimulation because that's actually going to grab all of your attention. If you have a fidget toy where you can go like this, that's a bad one because it grabs all your attention and you're not doing it. A good stimulator is one that kind of brings it up and allows you to orient. When it comes to the other two area, in terms of orientation, it's really helping students to understand how can they manage the things around them. And one of the big things that they have to manage is alerts and notifications. This is why we ban cell phones from the classroom. One thing that grabs our orienting part of our brain is when our cell phones are close to us, because our brains we've trained our brains to think, hey, there's something important in that cell phone. There's something important in those notifications, those emails. I should check, I should check, I should check. And so when your phone is in arm's reach, your brain is constantly wanting to go and check it. So you're constantly having to fight that urge to check it. And so therefore that becomes another big stressor on the brain and also pulls your attention away from what you need to be doing. So often we say parents need to, and kids all need to dock their phones at the front of the house. We all need to do that so that it's not going to interfere with the social engagement in the house, the other work activities we're doing in the house. We got to put those things somewhere else. And the other thing that we need to do around the orienting aspect is thinking about just mental health pieces so that we can learn how to regulate and develop our ability to calm ourselves and not attend to our worried thoughts. And then the last area is executive functioning. And this is things that happen in terms of with the environment, but also with the person. The key thing with executive functioning is we need to teach students how to basically, we have to teach them the skills. How do I go about organizing my day? How do I go about breaking a homework assignment down into small pieces? Again, we have programs that do this. The Homework Organization Planning Strategies Program, HOPS for short, is a evidence-based program that says here are the steps you need to go through to develop a student's executive functioning skills around homework. But with all EF skills, you always have to do activity by activity. So you can do an EF training for homework. You can do an EF training for how to write. You can do EF training around math. You can do EF trainings around very specific skills that you can build up. There's no one EF training that kind of does it all. It's all very skill specific when we go to do the EF training. But EF training only works well when we have those other two systems also working, the alertness and the orienting. So in the end, when it comes to a lot of this stuff, stress and mental health, or stress and learning, this stuff is complicated. Our brains are really complicated. But if we learn about how to use our brains, if we learn how to work around those brains that are helping us, then we can have really happy and engaged kids. We can get them to want to be with us and not hit us. So thank you very much.